morning and welcome back to Catapult Your Career, where we delve into the reality of various careers and explore practical advice for numerous professions. And today, on this episode, we're going to be looking at something a little bit different in terms of the C-suite. And I have a very kind of good friend who's going to be able to share a bit more about the details around what that involves in Mark Heisman. So thank you for coming, Mark. How are you?
Thanks, Michael. No, it's good to see you, and appreciate being asked to come and contribute in some small way. So thanks, good to be here.
Amazing. And Mark is an interesting character, I would say. I think he was my past kind of CEO. We're going to speak a lot about culture and how he kind of really has a character in his own and the personality he kind of brings. But I think, like, unlike most CEOs, where sometimes we have these kind of understandings of they're very formal and very kind of strict and very kind of harsh. I think we'll kind of delve a bit more into that, how Mark's very laid back and very kind of relaxed and kind of easy to speak to. So hence being a great guest on the podcast. So thanks for your time. It's not
Very
long.
kind, very
That's
kind.
right. That's right. The check's in the post. And in terms of an introduction, though, Mark, for yourself to kind of give the listeners an idea of kind of who you are and your kind of background. Could you just give us a bit of a background to your history and your kind of work to where you are today?
Okay, all right. Well, once again, thanks for inviting me on, Michael. I appreciate that, and humbled by what you said. So I read engineering at university back in the 80s, Imperial in London, and did 4 years there, and then went into a grad scheme with Royal Mail actually, and stayed there for probably 10 or 11 years. Building teams, learning my trade, I guess, as a leader, and going through all of the various opportunities and experiences that you can have in a big organisation, similar, I guess, to the NHS, really, in that sense. And then moved on from there to take over as a director at American Express, actually. So I went to Amex and launched their corporate purchasing card nationally. Didn't particularly enjoy that, if I'm honest with you. We can unpack that if you like. A very different sort of culture there. Financial services, very money driven and very sort of the cult of the person. Really, it was quite difficult. I didn't particularly enjoy those 2 years. And anyway, so then I went from there into the Prince's Trust and worked with what was then Prince Charles for 5 years, and ran big chunk of the Prince's Trust for him, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Great, very, very stimulating few years, working with lots of very interesting people. And then went from there into running a construction company, did a few construction companies, ran some quite large businesses, building hospitals and schools and things. And then went back into the charitable sector, and ran Christian camping for a few years, setting up camps for kids globally around the world, and then picked up at Provide about 4 years ago, just under 4 years ago, as the group chief exec, and absolutely love it. So you can't put me in a box, really, I'm afraid. So I've done a lot of things, probably not very well, but it's lots of different things, lots of different experiences. It's very hard to. I wouldn't suggest anyone it as a career path, but anyway, it's worked well. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think this is what I'm trying to share a little bit as well, in terms of like putting people into a box. I think the way of working has completely changed in terms of you work at one company for 30 years. I think people kind of change every 2 to 3 years, and I think even past that, kind of portfolio careers are now a much bigger thing, where people almost work at 2 or 3 different places at the same time. So in terms of that, kind of putting people into a box, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think this is all about kind of just sharing the insight from people who've gone down different paths and careers, to hopefully help others to kind of, whether we call them mistakes or not, but kind of learn from their experiences, really. And it's interesting what you've done. You've kind of gone to various different industries. I suppose you touched a bit on it about American Express, which is interesting. What do you think are some of the main differences you found between perhaps more your kind of charity, finance, and maybe even healthcare, I suppose? What are the main differences you found?
I think possibly it's the motivation as to why people are there. I'm sure Amex is a great organisation. Just I don't want to sort of diss them particularly.
No.
It's just that the particular team I was in and the directorate I was running was just quite a toxic environment, really, and very self-centered, very focused on how can you maximize your bonus, how can you do, and no sense of team or loyalty. So, and there was no sense of we're in this together. It was like, how can I do my thing personally, and stuff the rest of you, really. So that it didn't really fit my, not my values is a bit strong, but it didn't fit my persona, really. I'm very much a collaborative team player. No issue with people earning big bonuses and money. That's not a problem, but it's how and why you do it, rather than that becomes the sole driver of everything. So that was why that particularly didn't work, I think. And I would say, and I'd say to anyone listening to this, that if you know, just because you go into a job doesn't mean you've got to stick it. Sometimes you make mistakes, you know, and you get into a sector or a job and you think, I'm not sure this is really me. And then it's having the I guess partly the guts, but also partly the opportunities to say, I think I might have made a bit of a mistake here. I'm going to do something different, and actually gripping it and doing something about it.
Yeah, and I think there's two kind of interesting things you mentioned about that ability to actually kind of pivot and to think, because sometimes people are like, no, I've done it now, spent my money, I'm in this, I'm going to just kind of stick on regardless of the signs or how I'm feeling. And I think to kind of pivot even after those kind of 2 years, which is still a substantial time, but like to pivot and go, actually, I don't think this is quite for me, and to go into a different industry. I think not everybody does that. Nobody has the courage to actually do that. And I think that kind of is testament to yourself and others who've done that. And it's interesting how you kind of like, you were on the second point, I suppose, on the subject of, you kind of mention values, but not perhaps as strong as values. I think there is something there in terms of you, definitely knowing you, in terms of that community, family, kind of collaborative working, that is very, almost runs through not just you personally, but professionally in terms of everything you do. And hence why, I suppose, now being the group chief executive Provide, which is also, yes, healthcare, but a social enterprise and a community interest company, so it gives money back to kind of the local communities, kind of seems like almost a perfect nucleus of, you get your charity third sector, but you get to do a little bit of commercial thinking. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Oh no, I mean, one of my highlights every month is to do group induction. We have 30 or 40 people join us every month, and I always prioritize going on to that. Absolutely love spending time with new people joining us, and I always say to them, you're joining a great culture, but as of now, you are part of that culture and you're contributing to that culture. And I think that's really important. But I think one of the delights of the organization is that we have, and what I say at induction is that we aren't a charity, but we have a lot of sort of that ethos built into us as a social enterprise. And we are a business. We have to make a profit. Don't make a profit, I get sacked. I mean, it's not like the NHS where you can lose tens of millions and everyone says, oh, well, never mind, try harder next year. If we lose hundreds of thousands, they'll be like, oh, we need a new CEO, because we can't afford to do that. And I feel responsible for, the 1,200-1,300 people we've got, their livelihoods, really, because that, if you multiply by their families and their dependents, it's probably tens of thousands of people who are dependent on decisions that we make as a board and as a senior leadership team.
Yep.
But coupled with that is, so we've got that sort of commercial, professional focus, but coupled with that is, we are a social enterprise, we are a community interest company, and we do care about, passionately, not just on a piece of paper, putting stuff back into the community and making a real difference in people's lives, rather than just being driven by making money.
Yeah, and I think that's you're making your own small difference in your own way, I suppose, aren't you? That, like, you think about the ripple effect that has in terms of charities, that some, depending on how they're formed, of course, but some are very dependent on kind of volunteering and funding from others. The ripple effect you're having on a local charity, that's then going to affect that whole community, which in turn will hopefully help the kind of wider health and social care service and yourselves as well. So it's such a, it's a positive circle, really, of like, it's just going to help so many kind of hundreds and thousands of other people. And, I think also that's a really good message to kind of send to people accessing your services, that yes, you're kind of, depending on the nature they access, if it's kind of private or paid for or not, they're not just only investing in themselves, but they're actually investing in the wider community, because a portion of whatever they donate or pay for is going to be going straight back into helping local support groups around their next door neighbours and all the stuff like that. So I think it's a really kind of, you speak about kind of why we do things, and I've bored to death people around Simon Sinek and start with why and why we kind of do things. I think though again that speaks really strongly to what you shared. And just to kind of take a little bit of a step back before we start to go to some of those highs and lows or biggest challenges in terms of being a CEO, I suppose if you were to describe it in my simplest terms, what would you even say a CEO or chief executive actually is, I suppose?
What is a CEO?
Yeah.
General dog's body. It's interesting. I was at a conference recently up in Liverpool, actually, with a number of employee-owned organisations, because obviously we're employee-owned as well. And there was a few interesting talks there. And one of the talks was by a CEO of a very big company, and he was saying how basically the CEO's role is to act as the sink for everything that goes wrong. Because if something goes wrong in your team, or you always tell your boss, don't you? So ultimately, that massive, great pyramid ends up at the CEO, because it all sort of ripples up. So it's I mean, it's not been, fortunately, in my situation, but often a CEO role is managing bad news, because whilst it's great when you win contracts or you win awards and stuff, a lot of the time there are issues that need sorting out and decisions being taken and being made. It's a bit like the press generally works on selling papers because of bad news, not good news. And the CEO role is often filtering and making judgment calls about information that's coming up to you or down to you, if you think of it as inverse triangle, that people have got challenges, difficulties, problems, and deciding and making that judgment call. Is this something you need to deal with like immediately and wade in, or is something you can wait? And certainly talking to new CEOs, that's probably the area where, if I'm doing any sort of working with them or coaching with them, that's the area I'd say to focus on most. Is you don't need to solve every problem immediately, and you don't need to get involved with everything. It's having that judgment call about when to back out and let other people solve it, and just be there in the background supporting, rather than, I've spoken to some new CEOs and they feel they've got to know everything about everything, and it's like, well, you just have a nervous breakdown in a year because you won't be able to cope. You need to be able to filter that out. You need good people around you, but we can come on to that.
Yeah, and I think you perfectly touched onto something like the skills and qualities that are like kind of best suit, I suppose, someone in that kind of position. And there's a mix of like that control freak in everybody, I suppose, and trying to know all the numbers, and like you said, that's not going to lead to a good place. But then also making sure that, number one, yes, the culture is massive, but also it's massive to help with like recruiting and then also keeping top quality talent, because I think it's Stephen Bartlett maybe mentioned this, like every company is just a recruitment company. You recruit the best talent that you can, and then you make sure that you have as least many barriers in their way and allow them to do their jobs. And I suppose you kind of was starting to talk about perhaps that talent and how you can utilize them so that you only step in at certain times, not having to kind of control and deal with every problem. I suppose where was your mind going in terms of that utilization of talent and kind of people in the organization?
So going back to, I guess, partly what is one of the key roles as CEO, and I would say, well, there's a couple really. One is establishing, you establish the culture, whether you like it or not, and it's not all about one person, but people do look to the leader, and that leader does set the tone of voice, the color of the organization, the style, and I think massive influence they will have as the senior leader in terms of culture. And we can come back to that. And the other thing is getting the right people on the right seats on the bus. So it's that sort of analogy. And one of the things that I feel has worked very well at Provide, and I'm thank God for that, really, that we've got a very, very good and stable senior leadership team. So I can therefore trust them to make judgment calls without constantly saying, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? So and that takes time. It doesn't happen immediately. And it's a journey when you bring new people in, because the dynamic changes and the personalities, you've got to go through the storm informing, norm performing process. But once you've done that and you've invested in the team, then you've got effectively a high performing team. That then absolutely eases things. And then you're looking for them to do the same with their teams, and you've got this cascade of very strong teams.
Yeah. How do you, if someone is, say, like, almost started a new company, and you often hear this analogy of like the first 100 days, almost like, what is your kind of plan? Sometimes you might even be asked it in an interview setting of like, what's your plan to accomplish in the first 3 months or the first 100 days? And I would imagine that kind of storming and creating that kind of new kind of leadership structure underneath yourself to allow you to like focus on perhaps big picture and strategy and vision, allow them to kind of deal with operational matters. How is there a process, I suppose, from your experience that you kind of go through, or yeah, I wonder just how you kind of go about that.
What building that team?
Yeah, and I suppose not just building that team and creating that trust and that rapport that you, like you said, you can sleep on your pillow at night thinking, no, everyone, they don't have to constantly come to you for your reassurance or your
Yeah,
kind of, I suppose, decision on things.
yeah. So the three words I use is humility, humanity, and humour. So I
Mm.
think that those three things for me are key about creating a good culture and getting your team working. Sometimes it takes longer than 100 days because it
Yeah.
depends on the complexity of the team and the organisation. But it's just showing you're human. That you do have. I mean, you can't come as a leader into work every day and people don't know whether you're having a good day or a bad day, because
Yeah.
it's sort of, people are a bit uncertain how to deal with it. But being honest, if you've had a tough weekend with the kids or with your parents or something, it's being honest enough to say so, whilst maintaining, if you can, as level a perspective as you can. So it's just
Hmm.
showing you're human, really. And I think people like that, because
Yeah.
often leaders can be seen in this sort of Teflon tower, ivory tower, and it's like, well, they're not human. Well, actually, we are human. We have good days, we have bad days. It doesn't necessarily affect how we work, but we do have good and bad days. So there's a humanity bit. There's the humility bit, which is basically not taking yourself too seriously, and not assuming just because you happen to have some fancy title with a C-suite on it or whatever that you're better than anybody else, because you're not. And
Yeah.
and I often have to remind myself and my team, the person who's sweeping the car park so that we can get in because of the snow or whatever, is as important in terms of a value to the company as your chief this or your senior this or your director of that. So
Yeah.
it's that humility, really. I mean, I love the poem If, Rudyard Kipling, and that whole sense of, you can sort of talk with kings yet have the common touch. It's that ability to not be, so people don't come in and say, wow, he's a bit full of himself.
Hmm.
I was talking to someone yesterday and they said, how can you tell someone who used to be in the RAF, how can you tell if, when you meet someone, if they're a pilot? And the answer is, well, they'll tell you within the first 30 seconds. Because
Yeah.
they're like, oh, well, I'm a big knob, I fly fighter jets. Well, you don't. I love it. I love it when I go into a meeting or I go into a conference and people don't know who I am.
Yeah.
I'm not being. Hopefully, this doesn't come across as proud, but I love it when you'll chat away with someone and they'll say, "What do you do?" And I say, I work with the NHS, or I manage this, and they won't have a clue that you're the CEO, and
Yeah.
therefore won't adjust their behaviour. They'll just treat you as a normal person. As soon as you say you're a CEO,
Yeah.
people then start to have inferiority complexes or whatever they do. Anyway, so that's the humility bit, and then the third one is about humour, which is, I'm a massive believer in, as I know you are, in being able to laugh at the situation, having some fun,
Yeah.
lightening a difficult situation with a not a wisecrack, but bringing humour and laughter and smiling into a work environment, I think is really important.
Yeah.
And having fun, I think part of that is having fun. And as you know, provide we love having fun. We'll go away and we'll do fun stuff, because I think that's part of that sort of full balance of somebody, rather than we're just interested in you as a worker, we're actually interested in you as a person. And we have different parts of our lives, and whether it be family or faith or whatever, that's all part of the makeup that makes you.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you so much for that kind of, Mark. And I think just to pick on one particular event, and I know it was a bit cliche, but that you even ran a family fun day. I mean, it says it in the title, doesn't it? In terms of how it makes people human and how it's actually also to have fun. And I think sometimes those events outside of work can almost be equally as important to build that camaraderie and that rapport. And I would say, just for me personally, I kind of, it's quite easy for listeners and people to hear what you're saying and think, oh yes, yeah, that's all right for him to say. But I think for me personally, when you talk especially about the human bit, I think you're very open in terms of your family and how much you kind of prioritize them, and that's a very important part of your life. And I would say personally, that's one of the things I connected with you in terms of a human level, because I think that's incredibly important in terms of our family and the company we keep, I suppose. So yeah, I really like that humility, humanity, and humour. And I think if I think back to my dad, who did various jobs. He was an upholsterer, a postie, a messenger, and then a senior receptionist in a bank in London. He would say, he always said to me and instilled it to me that you treat the cleaner exactly the same way you treat the director. And he said he would have directors coming in that looked like, quote unquote, were kind of very bedraggled and had like messy kind of coats and all the rest of it. And there'd be some of the richest clients in the bank. And if people were to just treat people just based on their appearances, they would soon lose their jobs, because all of a sudden you don't know who you're speaking to. And it's a shame. It's a shame that, like you said, when you mention that CEO word, that people change their behaviours and in terms of how they treat you or how they speak to you. But I suppose that's the nature of the world we live in, isn't it? So
it is sadly. But anyway, no, I agree. Yeah.
And in terms of moving more to like the practicality, I suppose, and of your role, and of course yours is very much focusing kind of health and social care, and I know this will be different for different industries. This is always a tricky question, but what would you say the average week kind of looks like? And maybe even it might be the average month, because you kind of vary so much. But what are some of the kind of common things you would expect to be doing wake up on a Monday morning for that week?
So if we look at it from a month perspective, I would say there's a number of showpiece events every month, which absolutely take my priority. And that is generally board. So this is from a CEO perspective. So we have a monthly board meeting, main group board, which is the showpiece where all the SLT and the non-execs come together and sort of unpick what's gone on and where we're going. That for me is the number one priority every month.
Yeah.
That coupled with that, because we're a group structure, we've got a number of other boards. So I have probably 7 or 8 other boards that I sit on that are subsidiary boards, which are equally showpiece, less so for me, but more for the individual companies, which become an absolute priority. So investing in those, doing the pre-work, doing the reading, being present at them, because it's very easy to think, oh, well, someone else is going to cover it, and be sitting there doing your emails or doing what other stuff. So being present at those board meetings is key. So that's the board side of things. Then in terms of the team side of things, I'd say my senior leadership team, investing in them is an absolute priority. So we'll meet weekly for 3 or 4 hours every week, and that's more about the sort of the running the ship, making sure we're in the right direction, looking at what's coming up ahead, we're reflecting on the last week, making decisions that are much more granular operational decisions really for the group. Then I would say thirdly, it's about managing stakeholders. So whether that be spending time with other CEOs in the system that we're a part of, or whether it be charity leaders, or whether it be other stakeholders who we deal with as an organisation, it's managing them, making sure I understand what's on their radar, and then feeding that back into the SOT or the board. So there's that, the third one. Fourthly, I think there's an element of being visible as a leader. So being out there and visiting the hospital ward, or visiting the cleaning team, or visiting and spending time with the podiatrist, or whatever it may be. So spending time with the people who actually make it happen in the organisation. So the visible leadership thing. And then finally, I'd say there's something around, I guess, personal development, because you can focus everything on everybody else, and actually you end up burning out, or you end up getting exhausted, or you end up just running out of energy. So spending time reading, listening to great podcasts like this.
I can see it coming.
Yeah, or going to conferences. I was at a conference this week in Liverpool on employee ownership, which was brilliant. So spending time charging up my own battery, I guess. And I think within that as well is getting the right work-life balance. Well, I call it the work-life faith balance. But anyway, it's making sure you've got the right balance between, I could work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with the volume of stuff, but you can't, because you'd end up within a month you'd be having a nervous breakdown. So knowing when to say, right, I'm off, or I'm going to take this afternoon off, I'm going to take the grandkids out, or I'm going to go and meet up with Michael and have a game of golf, or I'm going to take my wife shopping, middle of the day sometimes, because actually I was at a conference last night, I didn't finish till midnight. So it's having that ability, and I appreciate that's easier when you're the CEO or a senior director, because you're basically accountable to yourself. But I do think it's important that you protect, I guess, your own mental health and well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned work-life faith balance, and feel free to share only what you feel comfortable kind of sharing. But I'm really interested about how you approach that and how you've kind of arrived there, because I think there's the whole plane analogy of the plane's about to crash, and they always tell you put your oxygen mask on first before you give an oxygen mask to others. So I really kind of resonate with that kind of personal development bit and re-energizing your own batteries, because otherwise you're just going to run out and you won't be able to support others. And especially as a coach, I suppose that's something I kind of resonate a lot with, because you'll very much enjoy seeing other people grow and develop, and it kind of really gives you joy. But if you're not careful, you can almost burn out yourself by not helping yourself develop and also grow in the same process. But before going to that work-life faith balance, I suppose, tell me a little bit more about that. How did you kind of arrive at that?
Well, first of all, don't steal the idea, because this is going to be my first book.
Well, it's going to be published, so I can't do that, can I? I'm going to publish this book.
I'm joking. So people talk a lot about work-life balance, which is pretty obvious. You've got a task, whether you're a receptionist or whether you're running the organisation. You've got a task to do that needs doing professionally, with integrity, and with all those other factors we talked about earlier. So that's fairly easy to sort of understand, but it can take over, particularly in these days of hybrid working.
Yeah.
And you could end up that just dominating. So there's an element of that. It's almost like three circles. Then there's your life bit, which is what else do you do? Whether I know you play golf, or or whether you go to the gym, or whether you do your gardening, or whether you do painting, or whatever. There's the whole life bit, and I'd include in that family, which, as you know, is very important to me. And I appreciate not everyone's got family, but family and friends, and investing in family and friends. And then my view is that everyone has got a faith, whatever that faith may be. So for me, it's a Christian. Some people are Muslim, some people are Jewish, some people are agnostic or atheist. Even that is still a faith, because you're just believing in whatever. So, and I think that spiritual aspect of everyone's life is an important part, actually. And I think it's a third dimension, which often gets forgotten. And how you invest in that, and how that becomes important to you. So with me, it'd be like I go to church, or I'll do other stuff that revolves around faith. For other people, it may be go to different festivals, or it may be they do other things that are spiritual, whether it be meditation or whatever. But I think that getting that three-way balance is an important aspect in making sure that, going back to as a leader, you come across as a balanced leader, rather than just driven by work, or soft touch, just driven by family, or a bit wacko, just driven by spiritual stuff. And people are like, well, what planet is he on? So it's getting that balance right.
That's fair. I do sometimes think that about you anyway, don't I? What planet you're on, but but yeah, no, I completely agree, and I would say it probably would be a good book in time. So yeah, no, thank you for kind of sharing that, and I think it almost, especially the faith part, which I don't think a lot of people speak about. And again, feel free to only share what you kind of feel comfortable with. But in terms of going now to perhaps some of the misconceptions or myths around kind of chief execs and that role, you might, in certain industries, in particular, say finance, you might see them quite kind of strict and staunch and very kind of formal and always in the three-piece suit and all the rest of it. And you wouldn't associate faith at all with anybody like that. Or if they did, they would keep it incredibly secret, because it's almost seen as, strangely in my mind, a weakness or something like that. Whereas you're very kind of encompassing and very you kind of wear that on your chest, which I think is nice. It's your authentic self at the end of the day. So I suppose, what if we were thinking about maybe some of the myths or misconceptions, and I'm sure when you've said you are a CEO, unless it slip accidentally, you might get some choice questions or funny reactions. What would you say some of those myths or misconceptions are?
What about what? Sorry,
about CEOs in general and people in the kind of C-suite.
Okay. Yeah, so I think, well, it goes back to the humanity point, really, I guess, that I think CEOs can be seen as a bit like aloof or out of touch,
Yeah.
or just obsessed with an aspect, whether it be profit or one aspect of the company, and sort of stuff the rest of it. I think CEOs can be seen as out of touch sometimes, not listening to people, just having filled by surrounding themselves with sycophants who's like, yeah, we agree with everything you're saying,
Yeah.
and not people who aren't prepared to challenge. I think CEOs can be viewed as quite shallow because they're driven by just one or two key drivers, and not that breadth of stuff we've been talking about. So I think, and I've fallen into all those traps. Don't worry. I mean, I've done, this is my sixth CEO role, so hopefully I've fallen into enough bear traps over those six different roles to know, you got to watch yourself there, Mark. But for the grace, I could be tomorrow. I could say something, or I don't tweet, unfortunately, but I could say something or do something. You're thinking, oh, what on earth have you done that for? Because it backfires and it can be taken the wrong way. So I do think it's a constant learning process. So I love spending time with other senior leaders and what I call stealing shamelessly. And being honest about, what are you doing that's working? What have you done that hasn't worked? And then learning from that, because it is that constant learning process as a leader. If you're not learning, you're really just starting to stagnate and starting to die. And that, whether it be learning to coach, or whether it be learning a new skill, or whether it be learning how to do a PowerPoint presentation, whatever, it's that learning process.
Absolutely. I think if you're not learning, you're regressing, aren't you? And the world is changing so quickly. And I think it's often, I occasionally speak about values, and one of my values is lifelong learning. And I want to be at the place where, touch wood, I'm 75, 80, and I'm still learning things how to be a better coach. Because I think as soon as I think I've learned everything, then I know nothing, and someone will just kind of soon pass you by. So I really kind of, I suppose, agree with that. And on a more perhaps lighter note, I suppose, what are some of the kind of the best parts, I suppose, of being a kind of a chief exec? And what are the most more rewarding elements that you found, not just in your current role, but past roles that you've been allowed to kind of do or utilise, I suppose?
So it's great when you build a team, really great when you build it and you invested in a team, and then for whatever reason you move on and they're still there. So I can look back on several organizations that I've run, and I've built a team, put a team in place, and then for various reasons I've moved on, and they're still there, exactly the same team, because they were the right people in the right seats on the bus, and they've carried on. So that's really, really satisfying. I think, a great aspect of the job is seeing people develop. So seeing people in an organization develop and grow and respond to, I guess, the culture you're trying to create. That's really very encouraging. And there's also the fun stuff of leading an organization that, as you know, we're winning awards left, right, and centre at the moment. Provide, and actually being able to take a group of people to an award ceremony and to be here, and the winner is, I think recently we won the most innovative culture in the UK, and we were up against Lloyds Bank. It's an extraordinary result for us, and that's not me, that's us as an organisation. But it's great to have a dozen people there at the table, and then for them to go, oh, it's us, and then go up there and be awarded a nice plaque and stuff, and things like that. So celebrating success, I guess, is a key, and enabling people to almost giving them the permission to celebrate success. It's not all work. It's that balance again. It's like, we've done really well. We've won a contract. We've won an award. Fantastic. Here's a bottle of this or something of this. Well done. And celebrating that success. Too easy to move on.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned about, well, sorry, not you, but I think it's commonly mentioned that CEOs can be kind of a lonely place sometimes if you haven't got the right kind of leadership team and the right structure. And I think being able to share that moment of success and that moment of joy with others must be incredibly rewarding, especially for people who perhaps going to awards evenings isn't commonplace for them, like they've only done one in their whole entire kind of career, and you can give them that opportunity to have that bit of joy and see it in their eyes, especially when your company name is called out. I think it's almost more exciting to see other people when they have that elation in their face than yourself. You've after a while you've done your fair few of awards evenings, if that makes sense. So, I think that's really kind of special.
But it's building that sense of when you succeed, it's building that sharing of success, celebrating success into the organization. So recently we just did an internal, as you probably will know, we did an internal award ceremony, and we had maybe 200 of our colleagues there, and we it was a lunchtime. We had an ABBA tribute band, we had an employee of the year and volunteer of the year, all this team of the year. They had a free bar, and it was like they were like, many of them were like, wow, this is like unbelievable. I can't believe, this doesn't happen in an NHS organization. But we're not NHS, so we're linked with the NHS, so we can do that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. And if that results in just 2 or 3 people staying who
Yep.
might have then gone, that's paid for itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think especially in terms of the times we are and the industry you are, recruiting high quality talent and keeping them is probably one of the most important things you could do. So yeah, no, I completely agree. And as we kind of start to pull our kind of episode to a close, I suppose, a question I often ask people, and I'm quite interested to kind of hear your answer, I suppose. You've done various positions, various industries as well. So it's not, we can't stick you in a box like you said at the beginning. But if you had your time again and you were to you finish your graduate position per se, and you're entering the big wide world, I suppose what advice would you have given yourself before kind of entering the reality of the world?
Oh, okay. I would say it's having that permission to move, to be quite fleet of foot, to be flexible, to pivot. I think the word you used earlier. I think that I did my first 12 years in one company, and I think if I was starting again now, I wouldn't do 12 years in one company. I think it's that ability to pivot into other areas that excite you, that interest you, that look a bit different, that are going to develop you, and being prepared to do so without, and to take a degree of risk, I suppose, in doing so. So be a little bit less risk averse in early parts of your career, a bit like you've done.
You might have noticed I was smiling a little bit when you said it, because it kind of almost felt like a little bit, how you spoke to myself. And I had the absolute pleasure of kind of being 6 years, I suppose, that provide under yourself and others. And I think it taught me so many amazing, wonderful things. Had so many opportunities to grow and develop. So speaking to that culture piece you mentioned, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, because I've said it previously on other episodes. But I think, I had that kind of awakening moment. Unfortunately, it came in a negative circumstance, but that's fine. I mean, in terms of my dad and his kind of Alzheimer's condition. But that really gave me a bit of a shock to the system to say, right, life is sacred. It's not about living life like it's your last day or any of that nonsense, but life is sacred. And at the end of the day, realistically, in 3 generations' time, they might not even know what I've done or who I am. So why am I worried about what people think? I need to do what I want to do. I need to have a good old time whilst I do it. I need to share it as much with others, and I'll be happy with that life I live. So thank you so much for kind of sharing that, Mark. And is there anything that we haven't covered, perhaps, that you wanted to discuss at all before we kind of close our episode?
No, I just want to say thank you for inviting me on. It's quite nice to have a chance to unpack some of it, actually, because often you don't.
Yeah.
So I thought your questioning was very good, and thank you for the opportunity.
No problem at all. And if anyone, for instance, wanted to reach out to you, Mark, who is a CEO perhaps, or is interested in some of the things you've said, where would be perhaps the best place to kind of reach out to you yourself?
Yeah, more than happy for you to share my email address, or I'm on LinkedIn. So
LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn's fine. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So thanks again for your time, Mark. Honestly, it's a privilege to have you here. And I really like to have a real breadth of experiences from people who are kind of like business analysts or doctors or even yourself, like in that kind of CEO positions. So thanks for your time. And hopefully to all the listeners, hopefully that was another interesting episode for yourself. And I'll see you all on the next episode of Catapult Your Career.